In the late 18th century, the world was on fire. Revolutions were sweeping through Europe, monarchies were crumbling, and the age of empires was at a tipping point. And out of this chaos, one man would rise to change the course of history. A man whose name would become synonymous with power, ambition, and military genius. That man was Napoleon Bonaparte. Born on August 15, 1769, on the island of Corsica, Napoleon's beginnings were far from grand. Corsica had just recently been annexed by France, and the island's people were resentful of French rule. His family, while of minor Italian nobility, wasn't particularly wealthy. But from a young age, Napoleon stood out. He had an intense drive, a fiery ambition, and a mind sharp beyond his years. At just 9 years old, Napoleon left Corsica for mainland France, enrolling in a military academy. He wasn't well liked. His Corsican accent made him an outsider, and his family's limited wealth set him apart from the aristocratic students. But he was undeterred. His education was where he excelled. By age 16, Napoleon had completed his studies and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the French army. Little did anyone know, this young officer would one day rule over much of Europe. Napoleon's rise coincided with one of the most tumultuous times in French history, the French Revolution. In 1789, France was on the brink of collapse. The monarchy was losing control, the economy was in shambles, and the people were angry. The revolution tore France apart, and soon the king would be executed, and the reign of terror would follow. Amidst the chaos, Napoleon saw opportunity. His big break came in 1793 during the siege of Toulon. Toulon was a city in southern France that had rebelled against the revolution and invited British forces to help defend it. The French government needed a skilled military leader to reclaim the city, and 24-year-old Napoleon, then a low-ranking artillery officer, was given a chance. He seized it. Using his expertise in artillery, Napoleon devised a strategy that allowed the French forces to drive the British out of Toulon. His success made him a hero and earned him a promotion to brigadier general. From that point forward, Napoleon's star continued to rise, but it wasn't just his military prowess that set him apart. It was his ambition, his understanding of politics, and his ability to command the loyalty of his troops. He had an air of invincibility about him, and this made him dangerous. By 1796, at the age of 26, Napoleon was appointed commander of the French army of Italy. It was here that he truly began to make his mark. The French army at the time was in a dire state, underpaid, poorly equipped, and demoralized, but Napoleon brought them back to life. He promised his men glory, wealth, and honor, and they followed him with a fierce loyalty. He transformed the ragtag army into a formidable force and led them to victory after victory against the Austrians and their allies. His Italian campaign became the stuff of legend, and he returned to France a hero. Yet Napoleon wasn't content with just military success. Napoleon began to plot his next move. In 1799, while leading a campaign in Egypt, Napoleon received word that France was on the verge of collapse once again. The government was teetering, and the country was ripe for change. He abandoned his army and returned to Paris, where he quickly moved to seize power. On November 9, 1799, in what became known as the Coup of 18 Brumaire, Napoleon, with the support of key political and military leaders, overthrew the Directory and established the consulate. He named himself First Consul, effectively making him the most powerful man in France. But being First Consul wasn't enough. Napoleon wanted to reshape not just France, but all of Europe. Over the next few years, he embarked on a series of reforms aimed at strengthening his grip on power and transforming France into a modern state. He overhauled the legal system with the Napoleonic Code, reformed education, established a centralized administration, and brought stability to the economy. These reforms were monumental and laid the foundation for modern France. Then, in 1804, Napoleon took his ambition to the next level. He crowned himself Emperor of the French in a lavish ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. With the stroke of a crown, Napoleon had not only solidified his power, but also signaled his intent to build an empire. But while Napoleon was consolidating his power at home, he was also preparing for his greatest challenge, the conquest of Europe. Napoleon's military campaigns during the early 19th century are legendary. His army, known as the Grande Armée, was unlike any other in Europe. It was fast, mobile, and expertly led. Napoleon's strategies were innovative, and he often outmaneuvered larger, more powerful armies. One of his most famous victories came in 1805 at the Battle of Austerlitz, often referred to as his greatest military achievement. Facing a combined force of Russians and Austrians, Napoleon was outnumbered, but he used deception and brilliant tactics to lure his enemies into a trap. The result was a crushing victory for Napoleon, cementing his reputation as one of history's greatest military commanders. At the height of his power, Napoleon controlled vast swathes of Europe. From the Iberian Peninsula in the west to the borders of Russia in the east, his empire seemed unstoppable. He placed his relatives on thrones across Europe, creating a web of influence that stretched far and wide. But as powerful as he was, Napoleon also had enemies, powerful enemies. Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria all saw Napoleon as a threat, and they banded together in a series of coalitions to try to bring him down. For a time, Napoleon seemed invincible, but every empire has its limits, and Napoleon's would soon begin to unravel. One of the key moments in Napoleon's downfall was his ill-fated invasion of Russia in 1812. Believing that a quick victory would force the Russians to submit, Napoleon marched his Grande Armée, over 600,000 strong, into the heart of Russia. But the Russian army didn't give him the decisive battle he was hoping for. Instead, they retreated, drawing Napoleon deeper into the vast Russian wilderness. The Russians employed a scorched earth tactic, burning crops and villages as they retreated, leaving nothing for Napoleon's troops to live off. As winter set in, Napoleon's army, unprepared for the harsh conditions, began to suffer. The cold, hunger, and constant Russian guerrilla attacks decimated his forces. By the time he ordered a retreat, it was too late. Of the 600,000 men who had marched into Russia, only a fraction would return. It was a catastrophic defeat, and it marked the beginning of the end for Napoleon. After the disaster in Russia, Napoleon's enemies saw an opportunity to strike. The Sixth Coalition, consisting of Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, and other European powers, united to bring Napoleon down. In 1814, after a series of crushing defeats, Napoleon was forced to abdicate. He was exiled to the island of Elba, off the coast of Italy. But Napoleon wasn't finished yet. Less than a year later, he escaped from Elba and returned to France in a dramatic comeback. Marching towards Paris, he gathered support from the people and the army, and once again, he seized power. This period, known as the 100 Days, saw Napoleon back on the throne, but his reign would be short-lived. In June 1815, Napoleon faced his final battle at Waterloo. Facing a coalition of British and Prussian forces, Napoleon's army was outmatched. After a day of fierce fighting, the French were defeated, and Napoleon's empire came crashing down. Napoleon was captured and sent into exile once again, this time to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. There, he would spend the remaining years of his life reflecting on his rise and fall, until his death in 1821. Napoleon's legacy is a complex one. He was a man of contradictions, both a champion of revolutionary ideals and a self-crowned emperor. He was a military genius, yet his ambition led to his downfall. His reforms transformed France and much of Europe, but his wars left a trail of destruction. Yet even today, Napoleon remains one of the most fascinating and studied figures in history. His rise from a small island in the Mediterranean to the ruler of an empire is a story of ambition, brilliance, and the relentless pursuit of power. And though his empire may have fallen, his impact on the world endures. If you liked that video, so watch video number 7, you will also like this one.